Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Nick, the EMF guy Pineault, who is the #1 best-selling author of the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs and an advocate for safe technologies. Through his unconventional approach, blending humor, science, and common sense, he's becoming a leading voice on the topic of electromagnetic pollution and how it affects our health. For the last few years, Nick has been interviewing some of the best minds on health and technology and facilitating the creation of courses and educational materials to raise awareness on this very important issue. You can find out more about Nick at I'm losing my voice here. You can find out more about Nick at the emfguide.com. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
This has been a long time coming. You didn't know that, but I've been wanting to have you on the show for years because I was.
I think I saw your name in there. I know it's
No.
tough. There's been so much demand, and I think it shows that the awareness around EMF is evolving in the right direction. Many practitioners and other people in the health space that have this, let's say, holistic model of health in
Yeah.
mind, discovered that EMF is a real factor in determining how clean or health supportive your environment is at home and at work, for example.
And not there aren't many specialists. So I was one of the very
True.
first participants in your, I think you called it your beta test group for your electrosmog course. I don't even know what year that was, but that was a long time ago. And I'm sure you've, refined it and you probably still have that course
Yeah,
now.
2018. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I'm hoping we can share some of that information today. But of course,
sure.
I always want to ask my guests their stories. So how in the heck did you become the EMF guy? So how did EMFs really pique your interest?
Yeah, I've been talking about environmental toxicity and different environmental toxins such as herbicides, pesticides, or even contamination in food. For example, high levels of arsenic in rice in
Sure.
California, or fruit juice is another one, especially from, Consumer Reports in the last several years did an extremely good job of testing different food products and realizing that yes, you get nutrients from foods, but sometimes you also get things that shouldn't be in there and that are
Mhm.
not nutrients, that are just a detriment to your health, and you should aim to minimize these toxins. And that was I started 14 years ago in 2010. And yeah, it makes me age a little bit, but I'm still very young. I'm just 36, but I started very young, and as a, let's say, a citizen journalist, just writing about what my findings were. And very quickly I realized that yes, the some regulatory agencies are putting some regulations on some toxins, but it's not enough. And the reality is many people are being exposed just through their tap water to levels of lead that are too high,
Mhm.
or levels of copper, for that matter, or
Sure.
pharmaceutical drugs and other things. So I became very concerned about what is in the environment that is invisible in contributing to poor health. Besides, the food wars, nutrition wars, what should we eat and what should we do? I was really focused on what should we avoid in the environment, and what should we minimize. And I came across the topic of cell phones and health, and the controversy over our cell phones are carcinogen. If you talk too much, will you develop a brain tumor, for example?
Sure.
And that was in 2015. And I got obsessed with the topic and really realized that while many environmental toxins matter, the one that was the fastest increasing and also the one that was the most often overlooked was EMFs. And I realized that so many scientists have been sounding the alarm and really meeting deaf ears at regulatory agencies for literally decades. And we're talking about hundreds of active independent scientists that are experts in their field. And many of them were winning awards when they were talking about environmental contamination from heavy metals, or acid rain in the case of Dr. Magda Havas from Trent University in Canada. But when they switched to EMFs, all of a sudden no one is interested. So the entire topic is almost, uh, this untouchable topic on a scientific standpoint, where if you want to put an end to your career, you study EMFs. Really, this is how
Yeah.
it goes.
Why? Why do you think that is? What's the
I think there's a massive defunding campaign that is heavily influenced by lobbying at multiple level. In the U.S., this is true. In Canada, this is true, and it seems to be also true in most of the Western world, where there is, some funding originally came from industry and also a little bit from the government. But as the years go by, more and more findings are in the direction of EMFs are dangerous for human health and for the health of the environment. Even, the studies on nature now on the effects on pollinators, the effect on
Mm.
the microbiome of humans, but also the microbiome of the earth, soil quality, water structure. There's many different angles to this problem. And the more findings are found that are, that go against the industry, the more the funding runs dry. So it's really a very inconvenient topic. And I think there's also a human bias in there where many people would prefer that EMFs are perfectly safe because, of course, we're surrounded by these machines now. And we've essentially rolled out the technology that I think in the future will be regarded as the smoking of the 21st century.
Hmm. I like that you just mentioned, so many of us are aware of, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but a lot of experts talking about various toxins and the detriments to our health. So we're looking for parabens, or, we're to avoid, right? And we're looking at phthalates and we're not drinking out of plastic and whatnot. But I think you're right. I feel like EMFs are the least monitored, and they also may be something that I would say even my listeners know the least to do about, if that makes sense. And so
Yep,
through the show today, I think we'll empower them with some steps, and you have lots of steps in your book too. But I think we should define what EMFs are and kind of go back for a moment. So what are
sure.
man-made Fs, man-made EMFs, and how much has our exposure increased in the last decade? Please
Yes.
share that too.
So yeah, there's a vast difference between the natural EMFs that we've always co-evolved with, such as, the Earth's natural magnetic field that is there. Part of it is the Schumann resonance at 7.83 hertz. And we know that this resonance, in fact, can help us, can help our circadian rhythm. And also, we know that visible light and invisible light as well from the sun. So the lack of sun during the night, or even, the moonshine has an effect on our biology. And all of these natural EMFs, we in fact need them almost like a vitamin, vitamin D. And that research around that is showing that now it's not just a vitamin, it acts like a hormone. It's something that is closely interlinked with every biological process we have in the human body. So we co-evolved with these EMFs, but there's also human-made or non-native EMFs that we've introduced just in the last few hundred years. And the most prevalent one that we introduced in the last 30 years or 40 years is this radio frequency radiation signal that acts as a sort of electro pollution these days. So it's not just the cell phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth gadgets, it's also the cell phone towers that we introduced. And now with the satellites, we're adding on top of all these technologies. So it's a lot of noise in the environment. And some people, argue things like, well, we've always been exposed to these EMFs from space. And that's partially true, except they don't tell you that our exposure is now a quintillion times higher than what we used to get from space in that microwave range or radio frequency radiation range. A quintillion is a billion times a billion.
Thank you. I
That's
was
a
wondering.
lot. 18 zeros after the one. That's a quintillion. So it is a tremendously higher exposure. It doesn't tell you about is it dangerous or is it not dangerous, but it tells you that something is new and it's at intensities that have never been seen before. And it's also with
Yikes. Yeah.
characteristics that make it quite more biologically active. An example is pulsation. In nature, you don't have signals that are pulsed the way a Wi-Fi is pulsed at 10 hertz. And these things make it so that our biology reacts in a way that is quite unpredictable, but generally is perceived as a stressor. And a good example for people to grasp a sort of EMF that I think has been more widely accepted as a hazard for health and something that can disrupt your sleep, for example, is artificial light. If you stare at a screen, you are exposed to an EMF that is man-made because these are frequencies that do not correspond to natural light sources that we get from nature, such as the sun or fire, for example. Instead, we get a huge peak in the blue spectrum, and it keeps us awake. It prevents us from releasing melatonin, for example, which is a very important sleep hormone, but also an anti-cancer hormone that is quite potent. As a result, now cancer researchers, especially in breast cancer, are saying women should start especially cancer patients. But to prevent breast cancer, a good strategy would be to avoid screens. And it kind of sounds wild, but the reality is,
Mm.
this is a type of EMF that everyone agree we can see, and we can also see the effect.
But
The
what if you put a
argument now is,
blocker on the screen, like a blue light blocker? Is that going to
yeah, on the
mitigate?
screen
Yeah.
could work. Some people use software-based blockers on the screen, but it has some effect, and it can help a little bit. Personally, I'm a fan of blue blocking glasses, although
Mhm.
the research needs to be developed further to show their efficacy. I use yellow glasses during the day, generally when I work at a computer, and that's just for eye strain and for comfort when I read on a page and write for hours every day.
And for
But
the listeners too who can't
yeah,
see what you just showed, you showed your blue light
sure.
blocking glasses, but they were of amber color. So a lot of times
Yes.
this the stylish, clear blue light blocking glasses are like blocking 10%. They're really not blocking much.
Yeah, that's not
So
enough.
yes.
That's
So
correct.
yeah, I just wanted to clarify for the listeners who couldn't see your
Sure.
glasses. Yeah, but
So
carry on.
normally before bed, if you really want to block these frequencies and have better sleep, normally we're talking about red lenses or dark orange rather than yellow. And this is really where you're going to block. Ideally, you want to block near 100% of the blue and green spectrum to have the best effects. But
How
you
far
know
before bed? I just got to keep
a
asking.
good, I'd say a good 2 hours
Okay.
before bed. What I personally do is that when the sun goes down, I put the yellow blockers on, and it makes me better able to. I mean, if I put in the winter, I'm in Eastern time, so in the winter, it gets dark at 4 p.m., something like that, completely ridiculous, and then I go to bed at 10. So if I get 6 hours of blue blockers, I would literally fall asleep in the middle of my meal, so it doesn't work for
Wow.
me. It's actually too, like, it is
Wow.
too drowsy inducing, for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
So I would put the yellow blockers on, and maybe an hour before bed, especially if I watch TV. The TV screens these days are so bright that I'll put the darker ones. And sometimes I say, okay, just one more show, and after 30 minutes, my wife looks at me and says, you're falling asleep again? Yeah. And I mean, that's not so convenient to make sure you're up to date with your favorite shows, but your health will be better off. And of course, you need to go to sleep at this point because your body tells you, yeah, I'm not very interested to
But
to
isn't
to
it, and
watch Game of Thrones.
it's an example of how important and how effective these glasses can be. And then on the flip
Yeah,
side, the dangerous impact of not having them and what the blue light can
for
do to
sure.
you. So
For
yeah, that's a
sure.
good example. Okay, so the question is though that everybody has, like, at what point do EMFs become dangerous to our health? Right? Like, how do
Hmm.
we measure that? How do we know? I mean, I know you're saying yes, at night we don't want to have, blue light in front of our eyes and then try to go to
Yeah.
sleep, but that's, I feel like, the ultimate question. How do we know? What do we know? Tell us the science. Like,
Sure. Well, what do we know? We know that other types of EMFs that are not visible, for example, the signal that your phone uses to connect to a cell phone tower, that signal is invisible, but it looks like the body is also seeing that signal in a sense, but it's not your eyes, it is other organs that are perceiving this signal. So for example, there are good studies showing that the pineal gland that is responsible for releasing melatonin will perceive radio frequency radiation from your cell phone as light and will get the same circadian effect that are negative, and you will lose sleep over it, or it will decrease your sleep quality. Another angle to this problem is the fact that this radiation from your phone, if you keep it right next to your pillow as you sleep, it might change how your brain waves behave. So that's a modification in your brain waves. And what is the consequence of that? Well, for example, in some set of studies in 2008, they've shown that healthy participants who don't describe themselves as, sensitive to EMFs or any of that stuff, they're just healthy. They don't
Mhm.
really think that EMFs are dangerous at all. And they get 30 minutes of exposure next to the head, and it makes them unable to fall asleep for an hour. And researchers said, and I found that really ridiculous, these sleep researchers said, well, we shouldn't really say that cell phones are dangerous because it's only the equivalent of half a cup of coffee in the arousal effect that these EMFs cause in the human body. But isn't it a kind of dangerous thing to have before bed, or a very, negative thing to have before bed, half a cup of coffee. And then they also said, well, we would be interested to run further studies because it sure looks like some people are more affected than others. So what about if for you it's 3 espressos worth of stimulation? Then it makes you wonder why some people have insomnia. And I think that
Right.
part of it is having devices too close to your body as you sleep. So one tip there is hitting that airplane mode button. It's not
Mhm.
just when you board your next flight. It's really
Yeah.
literally every night. Or if you need, to be on call during the night or be available as a parent, then you put it in the next room. Just charge it on a
Distance is
kitchen
on your
table.
side. Yep. Yep.
Distance is your friend. Exactly. That's a common saying among scientists, and that's a very important one. And that's just the sleep effect. There are more concerning things than sleep, because of course sleep is important, but a more concerning effect might be the development of brain tumors, for example. So we know that EMFs in that range of radio frequency, and that includes your cell phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, they are a class 2B carcinogen, and that's since the decision by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. That was back in 2011. But in 2018, we had two major animal studies that increased, let's say, the likeliness that this data should be reclassified as a class 1 carcinogen. And we have scientific studies from 2018 that said we think we need to reclassify this agent next to tobacco smoking and asbestos. So if you don't believe this is dangerous, well, consider that several scientists that are at the top of their field consider this is equivalent to smoking. So, of course, when it comes to smoking, less is better. So, in a sense,
Mhm.
time of use on your devices, if it can be reduced, especially extended use near the body, well, you want to avoid that as much as possible. And it's kind of silly in a sense, because the solution is not, purchasing another gizmo or investing in my services. Click here, pay me $1,000. It's just distance. It's fairly simple. You create a distance from your head, and maybe use speakerphone or use wired earbuds to talk on the phone. And right there, you almost eliminate the risk of cancer to the head region,
Mhm.
including glioblastomas. We see parotid gland cancers, acoustic neuromas as well, and then thyroid cancer is also on the rise. And there are good studies showing that maybe there's a link there with not only thyroid cancers, but different thyroid researchers are saying we think it's impacting the thyroid in a negative manner. And since it's an
Oh.
organ that is in the surface, very, it's not
Mhm.
protected as an organ. So therefore, it can absorb a lot of radiation. And they increasingly think that the epidemic we're seeing in hypothyroidism might be linked to the use of cell phones. Because, of course, when you talk on a phone, your thyroid is getting
Yeah.
exposed by a large margin.
Well, and I can see it just sleeping too, right? On your bedside table, your cell phone just being like parallel, right in line
Yeah,
with your
for sure.
neck. I'll tell you, after I took your course years ago, I kind of, as many people do, and listeners may freak out when they hear this episode. I thought, oh my gosh, I gotta clean up my house, and I had friends who at this point almost had like smart houses, their refrigerator, their, and I'm thinking, this is the worst. This is not what you want. And my
Yeah.
husband at the time, so the master bedroom, I've shared this on the podcast already, but he has never been an amazing sleeper, but his head on the, in the master bedroom bed was adjacent to the cable box on the other side of the wall. And so I got the meter that you had recommended. I want to get to meters at the end, but I went all around our house, and now I have better equipment, but went all around our house, and I thought, yes, I put a Faraday cage like around our router, whatnot, then, and yes, our router was emitting EMFs. The baby monitor was the highest. I will say that I immediately, we had just had our son, and after a couple weeks, got rid of it. I said, we don't need this crap. Baby monitor was emitting the highest radiation. The cable box adjacent to his head, just a few feet from my head, was the worst.
Yep.
And we immediately started shutting off, well, Wi-Fi. And also we moved the cable box. We don't even have cable now. We don't even, but back then we did. And that immediately improved his sleep, right? So we
Oh,
know,
nice.
and I love sharing that example because it was just so immediate that clearly you're kind of talking about this stimulation, comparing it to the effects of caffeine or whatnot.
Yeah.
But there is the stimulatory effect from these EMFs, and I actually want to kind of get into, which I've heard you talk about before, the relationship with the calcium voltage channels and like how EMFs affect them and why some people genetically may be more EMF sensitive. So just wanted to share that example. Thank you for those tips, but can we talk about the calcium voltage channels in that relationship?
For sure.
Yeah.
One researcher that has been developing this further looks at not only calcium, but multiple ion channels might be impacted on the cell. And for
Sure.
those who don't know, on the cells, we have multiple channels in there that shuttle calcium, sodium, potassium, just to name these few. In and out of the cell. And that's depending on, the goal here is always to keep the cell healthy and to bring the cell back to homeostasis. But one of the ways EMS might be impacting the cell is a very indirect way. It's not impacting the entire cell, but the voltage gated calcium channel. So it means that at the door, what is opening and closing the door is a voltage, but it's an extremely low level of voltage. So therefore, it's not impossible to think that if we have external fields that contain voltage, right? They contain an electrical part and a magnetic part. And it looks like the levels we are exposed to, even if they were reduced by an extreme margin, would still potentially impact those channels and how they open and close. And what does that mean, right? Oh, if calcium flows into the cell, more calcium, yay. Well, it doesn't work that way. It works, biology has certain sets of minerals in and out of the cell. It needs to keep that gradient in a certain way. If you mess around with that, the consequences are a little bit unpredictable. But what has been found is mainly it's a question of oxidative stress. And if you have oxidative stress, a little bit of oxidative stress could be good. It's a messaging, it's a signaling molecule that, or many of them are a signaling molecule that can in fact help the cell. But that's when you get one exposure, such as exercise or even, cold exposure, a cold plunge, or sauna is very popular in the news these days. And the benefits of that are tremendous. You overheat and then your body adapts and then you get stronger. You get this beneficial effect only if you recover from that exposure. The problem is that if we have 24/7 exposure, the cell can never adapt to this exposure. So you have constant oxidative stress. And the cell needs to use its internal resources in order to control this oxidative stress. And it uses, for example, glutathione or SOD, superoxide dismutase or catalase. And these are your internal defenses, your internal reserves of antioxidants. And it's not just the antioxidant that you might take in a pill, but a lot of this production is internal. It's created by your body. But over time, what we see is that people that are more exposed to EMFs have lower levels of antioxidant. So over time, they have lower level of energy production in the mitochondria, these powerhouses of the cell. So in other words, very, very simply put, I think that EMF is a stressor at the cellular level. And the more you are exposed over time, the more likely you are to feel this, let's say, this weight on your shoulder that over the years you become more and more and more exhausted, for example, from these exposures. And what happens is that many people think, oh, maybe this is aging, or maybe this is something else. And of course, everything else matters, such as the chemicals and mold and what you're doing in your everyday life and are you sleeping enough. But it's a factor that is often overlooked. Who really talks about EMF when they talk about the few factors that matter in health? Not a lot of people, not nearly enough, in my opinion. Of course, that's why I'm still doing these interviews every week. So it's really a matter of the dosage that you're getting, though. So it's not all hope is lost in the sense that we're always exposed to all these frequencies. So therefore, there's nothing I can do about it, right? That's something that unfortunately is the wrong conclusion that many people come to when they hear about EMS. And that's a bit of a discouragement that they feel. There's nothing I can do about it. In reality, if you control certain exposures, especially the ones that you can control because they come from everyday devices that you decide to put near your body in the end, if you have alternatives and mitigate certain things that are, let's say, the biggest contributors to your
Yes.
overall cumulative exposure, then you can do a lot of good and in fact start recovering and feeling better in this modern environment.
And I want to get to all those too, but this is a longevity podcast. So I want to get to how EMFs can impact longevity and ultimately our hormones and our fertility. And you've kind of already answered a little bit of that as far as
Yeah,
blocking melatonin and potentially the thyroid cancer risk, whatnot. But can you speak a little bit more to longevity and fertility?
for sure. Well, the first thing, longevity researchers, I've looked into it, and there are many different opinions about what causes aging. So it's a bit tricky to talk about how EMFs impact aging. It depends on what theory you're listening to. But one of the theory of aging that is one of the most popular ones is the accumulation of oxidative stress. So if this is the case, you
Yeah.
accumulate oxidative stress, and you might also accumulate DNA damage. Well, over time, we might say that EMFs directly contribute to premature aging. And that's certainly an agent you'll want to minimize if you want to live healthy and keep, a body that is functioning in your old age at all levels, and
Sure.
especially oxidative stress that is, again, 24/7. On a hormonal standpoint, we already know that the strongest data we have that radio frequency radiation is what scientists call a classic endocrine disruptor. So many people hear this endocrine. What does it mean? Well, hormonal disruption. And many endocrine disruptors these days, people are starting to be aware. BPA, for example,
Mm-hmm.
phthalates is another one. You have the different chemicals that stay in our water, when on cookware. Sometimes it leaches into your food. So all of these are examples of chemicals that will block your hormonal receptors, or in one way or another change how your hormones behave in your body. And sometimes detoxing from them or avoiding them can help you bring your hormones back to balance. What they forget is that your cell phone is also an endocrine disruptor. In fact, certain scientists, like neuroscientist from Stanford, Dr. Andrew Huberman, looked at the data on keeping a cell phone in the pocket and male fertility dropping to a lower level. So less sperm quality or motility or maybe sperm count, and also a reduction in testosterone. And he said this data is in fact more credible and more convincing compared to BPA. So it makes you wonder,
Wow.
we're all
Yeah.
about BPA free, and that's good. It's important. But why aren't we talking about, your cell phone is also doing the same thing as BPA? And that's kind of a radical thing to say these days. But in fact, the data is already there. And this is what is concerning to me and shows that we're extremely behind on having independent health agencies that are up to date on the science, because to this day, in the United States, the Federal Communication Commissions, that is the FCC, is responsible to regulate these things and the health impacts. And they've lost in court 3 years ago. The judges told them, the FCC basically said, we've reviewed the science and there's nothing to see here. So the judges received from activists and scientists thousands of pages of documentation about the potential health effects, the latest studies, and the judges look at the data and said, well, the FCC, you're completely wrong. Your decision is not based on science. You're going to go back to the drawing board and you're going to come back with a real analysis of the data we have to create safer safety standards.
Wow.
And to this day, the FCC has been stalling the case for 3 years. So the American public, and the same thing can be said in Canada and most of the Western nations and around the world for that matter, is kept in the dark to this day about these findings and about the fact that health agencies are completely disregarding the science we have, including the endocrine disruption.
Mm.
So effect on fertility is very strong. If it's not fertility, which is a little bit short term, well, there's the tumors and the fact that it's a carcinogen. If you want to live in your old days, you certainly do not want to have to die prematurely from a tumor. And a brain tumor is among the most dangerous types that you could get anyway. But there
Sure.
are also concerns besides just the brain tumors. If it causes a brain tumor, if you talk on a phone right next to the ear, what could it do if you could keep it at another place, such as in your pocket, right next to your genitalia? And
Mhm.
some researchers, we don't have much data on it. It's just, I guess, hypothesis or speculation, if you want, at this point. But many researchers have said, well, guess what is increasing right now in our youth? We have ovarian cancer, colon cancer. And then you say, okay, where are these things situated? Testicular cancer. We have, so all the cancers of the growing area are on the rise in our youth, and some of them dramatically so. So it makes you wonder, have we moved the problem from here to here? And I'm talking about right next to the
Right,
ear or to
right.
the face, to then there, which is in the pocket or the groin area, where the same carcinogenicity might be seen, and we
Mhm.
don't know to this day. So it's very, very, very concerning. We'll have the data maybe in a few decades.
That's not
That's
encouraging. No, but yeah, that's the
yeah.
reality. Yeah.
No, it's not.
No,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all that. I'm happy you shared about the impact on fertility. And my next question was actually going to be, are there guidelines and like are they being followed? And you're kind of alluding to that now, but what about in other countries like in Europe? Are other countries ahead of us with
Several
guidelines?
countries are way ahead. For example, in France, you had in 2015, you had several new laws that were passed to minimize radiation in children in schools. So Wi-Fi is more restricted than, for example, in North America. Canada and the US are among the most permissive nations when it comes to EMF safety thresholds. Whereas in France, you have for example, you have people that will take readings, and if the cell towers are over emitting compared to the levels that are approved by the government, the cell towers will be moved away. So it is more sensitive and more recognized in France, but also, in even emerging nations such as India, there's been examples of the cell towers being moved away from sensitive populations, including schools, including hospitals. And in the meantime, in North America, we're starting to bring these towers, instead of moving them away from people, we're bringing them closer to people with the advent of the 5G networks. So when you look at how governments are behaving throughout the world, in North America, we're among the most reckless nations that are really going completely against the science and completely against what other nations are doing in how they think about these risks. So it's really backwards, and it shows us, for me, it shows us how captured the health agencies have been and still are to this day. And I mean, I'm not making this up. The FCC has an entire report written by Harvard, their ethics center, called FCC, a Captured Agency, by Norm Alster. And it's a good read if you really want to be angry at the FCC. If it turns out you want to have, a light read before bed, it's something that makes you go, wait a minute. These lobbying powers are meeting the FCC 500 times per year, and they're essentially controlling the FCC. So it's not surprising that the FCC is now, it's not a health agency. It's essentially an agency that now serves as, a tool for the industry. They don't have the health expertise, and they have no intention to go and, lower exposure levels or any of that stuff. So it's going to be through the courts, and it's already through the courts, but it's taking a lot of time. So I'm thankful that, you have attorneys that are fighting this fight. But in the meantime, what I'm wondering about, and what I'm concerned is, in the meantime, people are kind of waiting for an answer. Is it dangerous? Is it not dangerous? What can I do about it? And the
Yeah,
reality is, we have to take matters into our hands a little bit when it comes to many of these topics,
sure.
because it's really, later in your life, in 20, 30 years, that we're going to have
Right.
safer phones, lower emissions towers, and these things are going to change. But in the meantime, if you want to live a healthy life now, or if you're thinking about your longevity now,
Yeah.
you better start taking preventative measures to lower your exposure.
Well, let's go there. Let's go there next. So, how can we minimize EMFs from everyday gadgets? I have a whole list of just kind of little questions I want to ask personally, kind of how you live your life also. I heard at one point you didn't even have a cell phone. I don't know
Well,
if
I
that's true.
barely I
You
barely
barely
use
have
it,
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
don't
can
I don't use it often. I can go through, I'd say the first thing you want to mitigate against is really your bedroom. That's the first thing I would
sure.
do before thinking about anything else. You want to make sure that if you're let's say go and lie in your bed and then take your arm and do, a large circle. You shouldn't touch anything that could emit EMFs. And
What about the
that's
circuits in the walls? Are you concerned about circuits in the walls?
That's a different type of radiation you're
Yeah,
getting.
yeah,
So that's a lower frequency electric or the magnetic component of that
yeah,
field. But all of these are cumulative. So
sure.
I start talking about radio frequency generally speaking because it's easier to mitigate against, but some people go a little bit further and turn off the breakers to that room, for example, to lower the electrical fields, and some people get even more sleep quality benefits by doing so. But if you really want to investigate all types of fields in your home, I would recommend hiring a professional such as a
Yeah.
building biology consultant. And that's something I would recommend almost, that anyone should do, because oftentimes if you go about your home and try to find sources, you might be able to find sources, turn them off. But if you're concerned about things that are, from the exterior and bringing radiation in, such as telephone towers, it's very hard to pinpoint which tower is problematic, what are the mitigation strategies that could be taking. So when it comes to cell phone towers, it's a little bit more overwhelming. But so that's why I often bring it back to the bedroom and try to
Hmm.
clean it as much as possible. If you turn off the breakers, that's one thing, but
Yeah, yeah.
just getting the cell phones out. And sometimes it's not just the phone, it's a tablet, it's a laptop in the corner that's downloading a series or something. So try to not have devices in the bedroom. And
Mhm.
it looks simple, but when you create this separation, the effects are not the same. At 2 feet from your head, your phone already drops 90% in intensity. So imagine what it is, in the
Mhm.
next room. It
Right.
still has some biological effect, but we're talking about a fraction of a percent. So it's really, really important to clean up the bedroom. And the second thing I'll say is just changing the habits to make it so that you don't have devices touching your body. And that's tough because that's a tough sell. Most people nowadays have a cell phone on their person almost all the time. A lot of men have it in the pocket. Women put it sometimes in their bra, and even men put it in the shirt pocket. All of these uses are
I see
among the
that
most
all the
is the
time.
most
Patients,
dangerous thing you can do.
especially middle-aged men, they come in and they all have like heart arrhythmias, I swear. They're coming in
Yep.
for we optimize hormones at our clinic, and many times they have a cell phone sitting right in their shirt pocket, and then I see they have AFib, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, is there an association there potentially? It's one of the first things I'm recommending is get that cell phone like out of your
Yep.
pocket. Yes. So
Yeah, and
sorry.
it, and
Yeah.
it's very bizarre because when you look at the data we have, there's even Apple that warned users over the MagSafe technology that's available since iPhone 12. And the MagSafe is, a strong magnet that they added to the back of their phone to have wireless charging. And they said people with pacemakers can be at medical risk. So what they didn't want to say is that could kill you. I mean, so they didn't say it like this. They said it in verbiage, legal verbiage. But the reality is, these technologies, if they're too close to the body, can interfere with pacemakers. And I found it funny in an ironic sense that we're not talking about what could happen if you have, a human heart and not an artificial heart. Or artificial, aid. So the reality is we have pacemaker cells that are, that use electricity also. So it's crazy to me that there's a lot of research on, oh no, we don't want to mess around with medical technologies, and interfering with medical technologies is very, very bad, very dangerous. But interfering with the real heart, there's no problem whatsoever. Oh yeah. I mean, so it's again, the funding is in medical technologies, and medical companies will fund these studies to make sure that the phones are not interfering with their users, and they want to save lives and understand all this. But then what are the effects on a real heart that doesn't need a pacemaker? Well, one of the effects that is seen is potentially heart arrhythmia, especially in
Yeah.
people that are sensitive, but over time, who knows? So that's one of the uses you don't want to have. And if you put your phone near your body, I suggest that it's on airplane mode. And what you could do is pre-download podcasts, pre-download music. On
Yes.
Spotify, you
Yes.
have the option to download things. So you shouldn't
Netflix
really,
pre-download. Yes, before you
yeah,
travel on a plane,
you
download your
you
movie
can
that you want to
pre-download
watch.
on
Yep.
tablets. Another example for kids is pre-download content. So that
Yep.
way, if the kiddo is using a tablet, especially young ones, on their person, they're not exposed. You don't need to be on Wi-Fi all the time. You don't need to stream these things. You can pre-download content. Even I have on my son's tablet, there's a Disney Plus, and I can download entire movies in no time, and then he can watch offline for extended weeks. So the storage is so great on these devices. There's literally no reason to always be streaming, because when you're streaming, this is one of the highest
Yes.
EMF emitting activities you can ever do. So you have a lot of intensity towards your body, and in children, these hormonal effects and these effects on cancer are even more concerning, because of course they're still developing and they're smaller.
Thank you for mentioning that. So I guess I want to go two directions really quick before we come back to minimizing our exposure in the home. I know we kind of talked about the bedroom, but so kind of on the contrary, okay, so you were saying basically when you're streaming, when your phone's constantly connecting to the network, right, that we'll just say the danger is amplified. So then what about all these people who have their phone on Bluetooth and they have location services on and all these things, right? Is that amplifying the problem?
Yeah, it's multiple problems
Yeah,
into
yeah.
one. So you're completely right. I tell people hit airplane mode. It's a little bit too simplistic in a sense, because you can be on airplane mode, but then open Wi-Fi back on. So you have multiple antennas inside a phone. You have a Wi-Fi, you have the Bluetooth that, connect with accessories such as Bluetooth earbuds, or, your favorite a media player that will have speakers on there that are Bluetooth, for example. And then you also have a cellular antenna. So that's three different ones.
Yep.
The GPS usually is passive. So it means that you can be on airplane mode and still use the GPS on your phone, and it will track you, but it's not emitting anything. It's receiving from
Okay.
GPS. So there's a video on my YouTube channel on how to use Google Maps even while being offline. You can start your trip, and then it will still track your car, although it's less precise than when you're
Sure.
actively receiving pings from cell phone
Yeah.
towers. But
Yeah.
so what you want to do is just, when you look at your phone, you're on airplane mode, and you turn off the cellular antenna by doing so. And then you want to cross out the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth icons. And this is how you know that there's no exposure. Or you can use an EMF detector to verify that this is the case, because if you have a sound function on it, you'll be able to tell very quickly, is it still emitting something, because you put it very close to the device and it gets louder. Well, the device is emitting something, and it's not good for you.
Sure, sure. And I also want to go back to kids really quick because I
Yeah.
like that you brought that up, and I feel like I kind of skipped over children and I need to go back. So I feel like, this generation of children is on tablets and are on cell phones, and I mean more so than any other generation, right? And they're like the smartest and quickest with technology too. But how do we know, or what are some examples of how children are affected by EMFs? I mean, you've mentioned brain tumors and other, but what are some other symptoms? Yeah.
There's strong research around that, and that's an area of research I just talked about this afternoon in a different interview. And Dr. Hugh Taylor at Yale is one of the main researchers on the topic, and he said we have the human data on epidemiology, and we have animal data that, for him, he says it's clear cause and effect. And what am I talking about? The more a mom is exposed to EMFs while she's building baby, the more then that baby later in life, before school age, will risk having ADHD-like symptoms. And
Wow.
that's a twofold increase in behavioral issues,
Sure.
emotional problems, hyperactivity by the time they reach school age, for the mothers who use their cell phones the most. So there's a direct correlation, and we're talking about multiple large epidemiology studies that are showing this. And then there's the same behavior is seen in rats and their offspring. So the same is seen in animal models as well. So he said there's clear cause and effect. So for him, it's causal. And if that's true, it means that, one of the most sensitive population is the unborn fetuses, that how it's impacting the nervous system. Is it that, again, it's half a cup of coffee for the fetus, except it's not just half a cup. It's now, cups of coffee for a fetus. So the fetus develops in a way that it becomes hyperactive, or it becomes hyperstimulated. We don't know the exact mechanism, but we shouldn't be waiting for these mechanisms anyhow. The message is don't have a phone right next to the abdomen, and
Right.
no laptop on the big belly, which I see a lot of pregnant mothers do, and
Yeah,
that's
no.
surely not a blame, because I know moms want to do anything to protect their baby. So once you know better, you do
Mhm.
better. But there are certain products such as EMF blocking radiation blankets that you
Yep.
could use
Yep.
that make it much safer to have certain exposures. Even if you're just scrolling your phone, it will shield the womb area. And the more a baby grows, the more likely they are to be exposed, because they push out, and then the skin becomes, there's this thin layer as the entire baby is being formed.
Mhm.
So it's even more, it's concerning for different reasons early in pregnancy, when it comes to the development of a fetus that is a few cells small at the beginning. And then there are different concerns over the fact that the baby is pushing out and more exposed to external factors at the end of the pregnancy. So on all levels, the data says this is very concerning for fetuses and then young children as well.
As well, yeah, no, children are very susceptible. So that blanket that you mentioned, I don't know what brand I have. I want to say it was called like Belly Armor, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
That I even have my son when he wants to play a game on my phone, and granted, I have a safe sleep case on my phone too. But I put that blanket over his belly, and I say, "Okay, honey, you can play this, but you gotta have." I have him wear the blanket also
yeah,
sometimes. Just,
that's good.
I mean, anything I can do to protect him. Let's go back to the home though. So I don't know if you had to pick like a biggest needle mover in the home for protecting your family. And I mean, really, if you even have Wi-Fi in your home, I'd like to ask just kind of personal questions, what you do, what you've maybe, and I'm sure this has developed over you
Yeah.
gaining all of your knowledge over the past several years. But tell us what else we can do, maybe outside the bedroom. But what are other big needle movers in the home for protecting our families?
Turning off Wi-Fi at night at the minimum is
Mhm.
a very good practice, because a lot of people find that even though they don't turn off the Wi-Fi from neighbors, right, or from the entire neighborhood,
Yep.
the one Wi-Fi router that is closer to their pillow is likely their own in their home. So
Mhm.
wherever it is. And for some people, they even told me, Nick, I think it's under my bed. And I said, well, maybe you want to move it away, because that's not a good spot. Or, you don't move it, but you turn it off. So
Mhm.
there's no harm there. So making sure that the Wi-Fi is turned off. In my case, when my wife was pregnant with our son, we both decided in common accord, because it has to be negotiated. It cannot be imposed by the EMF guy. And of course, it can be a source of conflict in couples if the other significant other doesn't have the information. It kind of sounds crazy at first, but if you make them aware of the research and you share a few things with them, generally speaking, they can agree, okay, at least we're going to turn it off at night. But what we decided to do is cut off the Wi-Fi antenna, and we haven't had Wi-Fi at home for 6 years. And how we do it is that our phones can use the cellular network from time to time, 4G, and now
Mhm.
the 5G networks are here. And what can I tell you? They're here to stay. So it's kind of, yeah, it's a bit discouraging, but we focus on what we can do in a city. And in Montreal, what we can do is turn off our own Wi-Fi, because our son would have been playing for years on end in his favorite spot, which would have been right next to the router. And our condo is fairly small, so I mean, where do you escape from the router, right? To
You
not be
can't.
near it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In big homes, I tell people, if you can relocate it to a corner of the garage where it's never near someone, maybe that's something
Yeah.
advantageous.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
sometimes they tell me, well, the signal now isn't that great, so we need 5 boosters in every level. So you're bringing more and more of these EMFs in your home. So in reality, what you can do instead is use cables. And that's a tough sell. That's a big change. But we've been using Ethernet cables to connect the router where the antenna is turned off, so no Wi-Fi, to our computers. And you can also hardwire or use
Mhm.
Ethernet cables for your phone, for tablets. And we have both our offices that are hardwired. And the advantage of that, many people tend to forget that, if the signal goes in the air, it reflects on the wall and it has a hard time getting to your computer. So it's not as strong as when it goes into a wire. When it goes in the wire, stays in the wire, it's faster, it's more reliable, and it's safer on all levels compared to a Wi-Fi. So in reality, I used to be very frustrated over the Wi-Fi we had in that condo. So for me, it's been an upgrade in a sense. And of course, especially given the fact that I don't move my computer around in my home office. I just put it
Hmm.
there. I mean, it's a laptop, but I use it there or in a coffee shop. So in a coffee shop, of course, there's no wire to speak of, but most of the time I work from home and I'm able to get wired in. And if you decide to use an internet cable, something to note is that you also need to turn off Wi-Fi on your computer, because if you put the cable
Sure.
in your computer doesn't even turn off Wi-Fi.
Good
So the
point.
compute
Good point. Yeah.
it's kind of a stupid technology, but that's how it's built. So you need to manually turn off Wi-Fi antennas. So again, it just looks like if you want to mitigate EMS, you have to go a little bit, forget about convenience and invest a little bit of effort. So you need to be conscious about it for
Sure.
sure.
I have some other kind of unique questions. Do you have a microwave in your home?
No, I don't. I haven't found. Well, I'm a, I guess, a home chef or amateur cook. That has been cooking for so many years. I do all the cooking at home, and I hate anything that is microwave oven reheated, and so that's one thing.
Anyways,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
the radiation, when it's on, it's leaking quite a lot. In fact, it
Hmm.
can leak as much as multiple cell phones. So if you're using it all the time, and let's say it's exposing like your entire body, because they tend to be lower these days, kind of in the cupboards and things like that. It's not good. These are exposures that I can avoid, and the only use that I think a microwave is good for is to sanitize the different things you use to clean dishes. You can wet it and then put it 30 seconds in a microwave and it kills everything. But
Sure.
it can also kill everything on your body. So I don't like it. I don't use it.
So currently being pregnant at work here, we do have a microwave in our break room, and we have a lot of staff, so they will use the microwave from time to
Yeah,
time, and they just kind of know, like, if I'm around, don't use the microwave. So they always tell me, okay, you're free, you're
yeah,
good to go back there and get your lunch, because I have paranoid. I don't want to be when we buy it, be by
yeah.
it. Okay, what about cars? Like, do all new cars have built-in GPSs? Like, how dangerous? Maybe you can also get into, like, is it to be, even as a passenger riding in a car, on your cell phone, connecting to the network, watching a show on Netflix or whatnot? Why is that? I'm going to
Yeah.
come back to this word, amplified. So kind of tell me about, just the danger of being on a cell phone in a car or a plane.
Well, you don't want to be on devices when you're in a moving car, generally speaking. But who's following this advice? Really, it's tough. So what you can do is you can go on Google Maps while you're connected to the network, and then input your destination, and then go back on airplane mode. And you're not going to get the traffic updates. So if you're driving in traffic and relying on like real time stuff, you don't want to do that. But if it's a long term trip, you can probably pre-download your music, pre-download your podcasts or interviews or content that you like, and then keep your phone on airplane mode the entire trip. So that's one way to do it. And then, of course, in most cars, including, it's not just the electric cars or the hybrid cars that are, let's say, an EMF concern. It's all modern cars now have Wi-Fi in them. Some of them have a cellular
I
hotspot
thought
in the
so. Yeah.
dashboard,
Yeah.
4G LTE, especially the GM models. But it's I tell you that now, and then next month they might come up, like Kia might do the same. And it's all the competitors in the car industry do not go currently for low EMF. It's not even
Sure.
in their conception.
Yeah. Yeah.
They go for what's cool, what do people want, and people want connectivity, connectivity, connectivity. So it is tough to go in a new car and solve these problems. In some cases, you can go in the computer's dashboard, the dashboard in the car dashboard, and turn off Bluetooth, turn off Wi-Fi, and just turn off the stuff you're not using. Because even if you're not using it, it is looking for a signal. So it's
Right.
pinging Wi-Fi or Bluetooth in your face for no reason. And then I always tell people, is your car a concern? Well, it depends on if you're spending time in your car. And some people tend to forget that. But, my dad is a realtor and he's probably spending hours every
Hmm.
day in his car. So that's a concern for him. That's, in fact, I would consider it an occupational exposure for him to be in his car. But for people that have either a quick commute or now they work
Yeah.
from home,
Yeah.
well, it becomes almost irrelevant. If you use your car 30 minutes per day, what should you mitigate against? Your computer, which is in front of you, right? So I wouldn't be too paranoid over cars, but the reality is some people develop electrosensitivities over time. Some of them seem to do worse in electric cars for many reasons. But then they might switch to a very modern car that is 2024 and beyond, that is gas powered, and then feel equally bad because there are so many sources of EMFs in a car. And when you're in a moving car using your phone, you are amplifying the signal because sometimes the connectivity is not good. It's not picking up the antenna. So what the phone is doing is ramping up its power, screaming louder and louder to try to communicate with the cell tower. So the recommendations from many EMF studies are try to avoid this as much as possible. And I think pre-downloading content, changing your habits around how you
Yep.
use the phone, again, you're trading, that convenience for a little bit more health. And
Hmm.
but isn't it what most people are doing these days if they understand that junk food isn't good for them? They, instead of going for the convenience every day, maybe they go once a week to the junk food joint, or once a month. So it is just part of being healthy these days is not falling for all these conveniences because many of them aren't good for you.
Love it. Okay. EMF blocking clothing, good or bad thing? What do you think?
It really depends. Some people that have electrosensitivities and feel really bad in environments that are electropolluted, such as cities or when they're traveling, airports, and inside the plane, some people put the clothing on and they feel much better. In fact, some physicians, doctors in environmental medicine or functional medicine doctors tell me that they recommend these patients to wear the clothing. Some of it is for the head, set t-shirts that cover large body areas. It seems to minimize how much you're going to be exposed by reflecting away the radiation, but it's not a complete protection. A complete
Right.
protection would be living in a bubble, right? That's another layer of feeling and looking weird at the airport, or even you getting in troubles at the TSA, because there are things that you can wear that make you look like a beekeeper. And for some people that are so electrosensitive, that's the only way they can live. It is an extreme tragedy for them, but at that point, they're probably better off not living in a city in the first place because it's too
Sure.
polluted for them,
Sure.
right? They need to change environments. But generally speaking, I think they're positive, and I hope to see larger scale studies on EMF blocking boxers or underwear.
Hmm.
And it's
At
kind of a
least that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a crazy thing to say, oh, my underwear is shielding me against radiation. What are you talking about? It's, well, new problems, new solutions. So engineers have come up with these. I wear them sometimes. I haven't seen a lot of data, but it is likely that it could prevent some of the endocrine disruption we talked about from phones in the pocket, for example. And it's really, it shouldn't be up to the users to protect themselves. That's what really I'm concerned about, and I'm frustrated, and I'm kind of facing every day in scope of my work is it should be that cell phones are safe. This is not the case. So if we give people tools such as the EMF blocking boxers and they forget about, oh, I didn't put my phone on airplane mode, it's in my pocket again. Well, then at least they're protecting their fertility. I think
Mhm.
it's not a perfect solution, doesn't address the problem. It's kind of an indirect solution, but I think it might be beneficial for some people to try it, especially if you're trying to conceive and you have a hard time. Why not try it? And of course, it's quite an investment, though, replacing all your underwear with EMF blocking. These tend to be expensive. So
I'd
maybe
like to
ask
see
for a
those.
Christmas gift, okay, or something.
I'd like to see those studies too. I think
Yeah,
I see you wearing an Oura ring. Are you wearing an Oura ring or some
I
sort of
am.
biohacking
Yeah,
device? Yeah. Do you
yeah.
put that in airplane mode? Like
It's always on airplane mode, and
yep, yep,
what I
it's,
like, yeah, what I like about it, most biohacking tools
yep,
that use Bluetooth cannot store the data locally in the machine. What it does instead, in many situations, is you wear something on your face or smart glasses or I don't know, and it always syncs to your phone. So syncing to your phone is always pinging Bluetooth. The Oura Ring is not like that. Instead, you can sync once per day by putting it back
yep.
on the charger, and
Yep.
it will open Bluetooth, and then it will connect to the phone, and it will say, thank you, here's the data, you slept very well, Nick, cool. And then I can put it back on airplane mode, no emission whatsoever, no radiation. And I think that's a smart way to do it, because why exactly would I need my data to be synced multiple times per second to know
You
what
don't.
has been,
Yeah.
what
Yep.
was my
Yep.
sleep? And then
Yep.
it also makes us neurotic, let's face it. I mean, it's like, oh no, I'm doing this interview right now and my stress levels are off the chart. I mean, talk about something that makes you paranoid or anxious. So I think, quantification might be good, but many sleep tracking devices that do not have this option of the URA contribute to the problem, ironically so. So personally, I'm
So
not a fan of
talk someone out of
anything.
an Apple Watch. I have so many patients with Apple Watches, and they're like, "Oh, I have all these children, and I have got to know someone's got to be able to get a hold of me." And I'm like, well, they could call your cell phone. Like, you don't have
Yeah,
to have your
exactly. Yeah.
phone on your wrist at all times. So talk 30-second spiel. Talk someone out of wearing an Apple Watch. Go.
Well, the Apple Watch is emitting a class 2B carcinogen, but in your veins, and your
Ah.
your entire your entire blood supply is running every few minutes and is being irradiated. So we know that there are certain medical technologies that do the same, except with healthy signals such as light, and that's beneficial. But we can only be left guessing what this oxidative stress is doing, irradiating your blood all the time. That's in my mind, that's a very poor use of technology. And if I had an Apple Watch, I would likely keep it on airplane mode almost
Yep.
all the time, but it kind
Yep.
of defeats the purpose. It becomes just a cool watch that looks good, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of anything that is touching your body, because we know the science is there against because of these
Yep.
tumors. And of course, there aren't really wrist tumors or finger cancer, but at the same time, some people are reporting rashes or reporting
Mm-hmm.
a sort of carpal tunnel and are working on the
Mm-hmm.
computer feeling inflamed. And then they can pinpoint that when they remove that watch, eventually it heals. So it looks like it's keeping some more sensitive or more, prone people to higher degrees of inflammation from these machines, which is not surprising. I'm not surprised by these findings. And if even you can even find threads of discussion on Reddit and on the internet left and right about what they call, I think, smartwatch rash. If you look for that, a lot of people are saying, oh, it's a nickel allergy. It's a stainless steel allergy. What they don't talk about is the fact that in even healthy participants in the past, we found that EMFs can stimulate the mast cells to release
Mm-hmm.
histamine,
Right.
just like an allergic reaction. And
Mm-hmm.
for some people, it will go as far as having a skin rash. So I think that some of these rashes are directly due to people being irradiated and the skin saying, what on earth is going on? I don't know what is the signal, but I'm going to release histamine and try to
Yeah.
buffer this allergen. But it's like fighting against a ghost. It doesn't work, and it keeps going and going and going, and you're inflaming your region. It's certainly not good for you.
Fighting against a ghost. Yeah, I haven't heard that one. That was good. That was great. Okay, I only have a couple more questions. You've given us so much information today. I know you've been on so many interviews. How many times have you been on an interview where the host is wearing like Bluetooth, headphones, and you're cringing, and you have to somehow work that into the conversation?
Many times, many times. But it brings me to something. I have many other activists in my circles, and one of them, one host told me that she was trying to get someone on her show to talk about EMFs, but then the person realized that she was wearing Bluetooth earbuds, and
Yeah.
that person, I don't know if that's a building biologist, said, "Oh, that's unacceptable. I won't do your show," and kind of was very rude about it. And I think this just shows you that's not how you do it, because people wear what they think is okay for them. It's not like you can blame
No,
people.
it's an
And that's
opportunity for
yeah, that's
yeah.
an opportunity to
Yeah.
to to educate them. And for sure, if I talk to a podcast host, I would say, well, that's a class 2B carcinogen. Some scientists say that should be a class 1, and it's in your ear. And I would only ask them a question: how many hours are you wearing this during the week? And if that's just during this one interview, well, 1 hour per week. I would say,
Sure.
okay, well, it's not one of your main exposures, except many people would answer, well, it's always in my ear from the morning until I go to
Mhm.
bed. And or I fall asleep with it. Even worse, it's like the entire day. So in that case, we're talking about prolonged exposure to something that we think has been linked with brain tumor.
Right.
So anyone who claims that Bluetooth technologies are perfectly safe is completely disregarding the science we have. At a minimum, we could say it is very likely carcinogenic, and we don't know how it will affect the future generations or even that generation of adults. We have no idea.
What's the difference between like what, well, I can't quite see what you're wearing, but between like a
Yeah,
corded or like
it's
a
corded.
air
Yeah,
or air tube headset? What's the
yeah.
deal with the air tube? What's the difference?
The
In the,
difference is basically that on an air tube, you would have just a tube of air that goes from about this location here to your ear. And what it changes is that it's gonna not have any type of electricity going in your ear. And I think this is a decent tool. However, I think it's a technology that is built more for extremely hypersensitive individuals, where I think for some people they might see benefits, but for a lot of people, for me, it's a problem because the fit isn't right on any model I've ever tried, and also the sound is not good. So instead, what I
sure.
use is something called HARD, called HARD, and
Hmm.
that's the acronym for I cannot recall what it's for, but it's from Shield Your Body, and that's basically a tool that has a microphone jack, auxiliary jack that you put in your computer, and then you plug your headphones in that. So it's a
Hmm.
filter. It will filter out any,
Cool. Yeah.
dirty frequencies that would go up the cord. So it's not a complete replacement for air tubes, but I think it's an in-between solution that is more decent
I
if
have never
people
heard of
people
that.
still want
Yeah.
the good audio quality also, which the air tubes severely lack, unfortunately. So
Sure, sure. Given that you speak a lot and you travel a lot, are there any tips you have? Like, are you someone who, after getting off a plane, is going to go ground? Or, like, are there any major traveling tips that you could share that have helped you?
I think that blue blockers have really changed how I travel in a major way. When I travel overseas, doesn't happen a lot these days, but I would try to have my blue blockers be the same timing as my destination. So if
Sure.
I'm
Yes.
in the maybe I'm in the morning, but I know in France is getting late, then I'll start wearing the very dark blue blockers
Sure.
as if I'm in France, for example. So I'm yeah, and the same thing in Asia. It's even, sometimes it's more complicated, but you just look at the time of arrival and you act as if you're going there. So what I've seen is that in one case, I was able to adapt within 24 hours of arrival, which is
Wow.
completely different from what we hear is, it
Yeah.
will take 1 day per hour of jet lag or differences in the time zone. So the blue blockers seem to really be able to modulate your ability to adapt. And a second thing I would say is meal timing. If you can try to forget about the endless meals and snacks that they serve you, bring your food or kind of ask them to put your plate aside for a while and eat as if you're at your destination. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't feel like eating, but it's dinner time in France and you're going to France, then you eat, and you eat a little bit at least, because there's a circadian rhythm to
Yeah.
appetite, and
Sure.
it will set your circadian rhythm also. I think that earthing, being barefoot on the earth, on any type of ground, dirt, or going swimming, for example, or going to the beach at your destination is also highly beneficial. And this is the main thing I'm using for jet lag. But I must say, when I travel, I always bring a long Ethernet cable, because I tend to be able, not in hotel rooms, but in most Airbnbs, you have access to the router. And even sometimes I turn off the Wi-Fi inside the router because I'm able to. But
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not able to turn off the Wi-Fi on the router, you can plug in, turn off the Wi-Fi on your computer, which is closer to your body compared to that Wi-Fi router anyhow. And that's your main source of exposure, is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
laptop in front of you, right? So what you do is turn off the Wi-Fi antenna and plug it in, and then at least you're mitigating that. And the Wi-Fi cable, the Ethernet cable can be, 50 feet if you want. So it's a little bit, it's big, but it doesn't take that much room in a medium suitcase either. So it's one
Yeah,
of the main things I would bring in my travel, along
that's a
with
good
maybe
hack. Yeah.
an EMF meter or detector.
Oh, we didn't get to meters. Oh, I got to come back to meters. I was going to ask you your last question, but now I got to ask meter. What meter? I mean, I know years ago when you wrote your book, what very affordable small meter or, you had recommended. Has that changed? Like, what do you recommend for in-home use, let's say, for a
Yeah,
patient?
the it used to be the Enviro RD10. It's very small, about $150, but I don't think it's manufactured anymore, unfortunately. And something a little bit more sophisticated and with a sound function that I like is $200. So it's not that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
expensive.
yeah.
I mean, for most people, it's quite an investment still, but something that you'll probably keep for a good 10, 15 years, hopefully. And I like the Sam Protect 33 on my website, theemfguy.com. You can find
Yeah.
it
Oh, good,
in
good.
the shop section. So it measures three types of field: the radio frequency radiation, so the wireless stuff, the magnetic field, and electric fields, but at the same time and using LEDs. So it makes it also very simple for people. And I've come to the
Yeah.
understanding that, if you're not interested to be a building biologist, you should probably keep your meters very simple, because it creates massive confusion in some people. And even, I've seen some people say, you recommended the meter, Nick, but I'm more confused than ever, so I'd never use it.
Oh, oh, yeah.
Other people tell me I use it all the time, but I'm
Mhm.
anxious all the time. So sometimes it can be tricky using a meter. So really, why do you want a meter is to verify what is emitting radiation and what is not. So if
Mhm.
if you say, well, I've turned off my Wi-Fi antenna on my computer, and then you put the meter, you put it near your computer, you hear, and it keeps screaming at you. You say, oh, well, maybe I didn't, and you realize that the work has not been done properly because the antenna is still emitting. That's just an example, but you can also find sources such as, in hotel rooms. Oftentimes the
Yeah.
alarm clock
Yep.
might be Bluetooth, but you don't
Right by your
realize it.
head. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how I found our cable box was. Well, that's how I measured the baby monitor too. Was just having a meter and then thinking, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any way to know, like, especially for someone who's looking, I would love to build a non-toxic home one day. I can see visible huge cell phone towers, right? But is there any way to know or predict like where those may be one day like placed? Does that make sense? Like you would hate to build a
Yeah.
home and then, 2 months later they put up a cell tower a block over. Is there any way to
Yeah.
know? Have you ever
No,
been asked? Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
not. It's these days. I mean, it maybe in certain countries the I'd say the different cell phone companies are less reckless than in Canada or the US, but right now it's really at its worst, where they're not only there are some rules about the placement of cell towers, but even the cell phone companies are disregarding even the permits, getting the right permits. They're kind of filling fake permits, and there's an extremely large fraction of all permits that are fake, and that has been found by attorneys that I know in New York City. And so the industry is, so sloppy on so many levels that the only thing that matters is rolling out these technologies as fast as humanly possible. And
scary. Yeah,
and how they act is another attorney, Julian Gresser, that is one of my mentors at the moment. He said that companies are now acting in flagrant disregard of law. So they complete what they say is, oh, there are laws about that. Okay, that's cool. Well, sue us. So that's how they act. That's really how
yeah,
they act. So
yeah,
that's unfortunately the case. And if you want to live in a city and build something, I would consider hiring a professional and thinking about shielding bedrooms, because at
sure.
least, and shielding bedrooms, it's either a bad canopy that is a bit invasive because it doesn't look the best, but you can also use paint that is completely,
Yeah, yeah,
invisible.
yeah,
It looks like normal paint, and you have maybe, a nice semi-transparent drape over your windows, and
yep,
it kind of looks normal, but it is completely shielded. And
yeah.
this room would be, shielded against any future install of cell towers as well. And it is an investment, but if I had to build from scratch, this is how I
You would
would
do.
personally
Yeah.
do it. Yeah.
Wonderful. So many tips. Thank you for all answering all those questions. Well, tell us again. You mentioned your website, but mention it again. Where can listeners find you? Kind of what your social media handles are, and tell us about your upcoming summit.
Sure. People can find me at theemfguy.com. And the summit is the 2024 EMF Hazard Summit. Is the third year we do an annual summit, and we have attorneys that talk about EMFs, but we also have a lot of EMF aware doctors that talk specifically about electrosensitivity. So that's really the theme for this year: how to find out if you are personally getting symptoms from these exposures. And a lot of people are getting them, except they don't realize at first that they cannot pinpoint that EMF is to be blamed. And we're really focused on educating the public about electrosensitivity and how to recover, how to get better if you find out that you're getting more and more sensitive as the years go by. So it's at EMFhazards with an S.com. And we have 20 different talks from April 11 to 14 presented for free to the public. You just have to, enter your name and email to watch them. And I'm really, really happy about this lineup. I think it's going to be very exciting and provide a lot of solutions for people that are kind of itching to get them. And I'd say, this is both for people who feel electrosensitive and then just people in general who feel
Want to
healthy,
learn?
but
Yeah.
they want to
Yeah.
learn. They want to
Yeah.
learn about, okay, what is this about? What do I need to do? What should I ameliorate in my environment for better hormonal stability and better longevity also? Because of course, as we talked about, there are multiple reasons that you want to avoid these exposures, even if you don't feel them personally.
Yes, wonderful. Well, I will post a link to your summit in the show notes, and I understand you also have a free gift. So tell us about that.
Yes, so we have an entire guide that I created, 6 signs that you are electrosensitive. It's also part of, this summit launch is this new guide. And basically it's really 6 signs you look for, including the symptoms that are most common in electrosensitives. And many people don't realize that one of the signs, for example, is if you get away from these exposures and you feel better, then it's a sign that these exposures were there impacting you, except they were masked, because it's hard to know, well, what is my energy level right now? Is it 10 out of 10 or 8 out of 10? And maybe you thought you were 10 out of 10, but in reality, when you go away, you become 12 out of 10. So somehow you're more energized than your baseline. And part of the reason might be because at home you have these EMF exposures, and if you go camping, you don't. So these are the type of tips we find in there. And I got the entire report. It's a free report, short read, but it was reviewed by Dr. Stephanie McCarter, who regularly treats electrosensitive patients. So a lot of expertise in there and a lot of data that I know people will appreciate, and is not nearly enough talked about.
Wonderful. Well, we will post that link also in the show notes. Okay, this has been amazing. Tell me as we wrap up the show, last final question. What is your top longevity tip?
My top longevity tip, I think, is just building habits. And it's difficult, but this is how I've been personally able to become more and more resilient health wise as the years go by, is by trying to incorporate certain practices in my
Sure.
life. And I've struggled like everyone else, but I do have this ability to kind of slow things down and, okay, let's do one thing at a time. Something I've been doing lately is called is an app called Audio Cardio, and it's based on research of certain frequencies that are outside your hearing range right now. But if you train them, you can get back some of your hearing. And I discovered that at 33 years old, my hearing was, average low. So almost starting to lose hearing. And I
Hmm.
knew that my hearing wasn't good, but I thought about longevity and said to myself, well, if I don't have good hearing now, what's going to happen at 60 and 70 and 80 years old? If I want to live old, maybe I'm going to lose all hearing. So that's something that's very sad. And I said, okay, well, let's build a habit around it. I have to listen to these audio frequencies 1 hour per day. And I found it very easy, but it's all about building practices.
Yeah, your
There's no
habits. Yeah.
magic pill, but if you build that over time, I found that my hearing, I think, has improved 1% in 1 month. So it's difficult because I find that when I was younger, I wanted everything to be fast, and then I found out that things take time,
Mhm.
right? So it's a bit inconvenient, but at the same time, if you see it as very long term, same thing with my exercise habits and stretching and these kind of things that, oh, it looks like I always have to stretch. Well, guess what? I'm sitting on a chair right now, so I'm getting tight as we speak. So it looks like I'm going to be stuck with these practices for life. If you want to still move great and feel great in your old age, you kind of have to start somewhere, and preferably start young like me. So as I've
Yes.
been building these practices, I've been appreciating that, okay, I'm in for the long term now, and I'm a little bit less hyperactive about it.
Longevity tips keep getting better and better. When I started the podcast, everyone would say sleep, 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 and now I just 200 episodes in, it's like they're getting better and better. No one had mentioned habits, so that was a great tip. Thank you again today for coming on the show and just empowering us to read how we can reduce our exposure to EMFs. And thank you for your passion spreading education on this topic. Today, I sure hope this didn't fall on deaf ears. So I hope my audience checks out your book and your summit. Again, link of which I'll post in the show notes. This was wonderful. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.